The wrench slipped from her hand and clattered into the hollow frame of the Jeep, but she didn't flinch. The men at the garage door were already laughing at her, their voices sharpened by mockery and the kind of arrogance that feeds on silence. One of them stepped forward, tapping the frame of the vehicle with his knuckles, saying she should leave this kind of work to people who knew what they were doing. The others smirked, arms crossed, their uniforms neat and crisp under the glare of the sun. She ignored them, her hands, blackened by grease and trembling faintly from hours of work, reached back into the engine compartment with a patience that came from deeper wounds than broken bolts or rusted steel. They saw only a young woman bent over a relic, sweat dripping onto faded olive paint. They didn't see the heaviness in her chest each time the wrench slipped, or the unspoken vow she carried in silence. The Jeep was more than metal and rubber. It was memory. It was a coffin she refused to leave buried. A promise she had made long ago in a desert where names were forgotten, but sacrifices were not. Every dent on the frame was a scar she remembered. Every faded number stenciled on its body a reminder of someone who never came back. Her name was Claire. She had worn a uniform once, though few would believe it now. Her body bore the quiet marks of service, scars beneath the fabric of her shirt, the stiffness in her shoulders from carrying more than her share of weight. She had walked behind coffins wrapped in flags. She had delivered folded cloth into the arms of widows who could not breathe through their sobs. She had spent nights in silence, staring at ceilings, waiting for sleep that rarely came. The Jeep had belonged to her unit once, long before time and neglect had condemned it to rot. When she bought it from a scrapyard for $500, it wasn't a purchase, it was a rescue. Her neighbors had laughed when they saw her towing it home, the rusted skeleton barely holding together. They whispered, wondering why she, of all people, thought she could restore something that belonged to another era. Even the men who now stood at her garage door didn't come to help. They came to sneer, to remind her of the gap between those who fought and those who stood by watching. One of them leaned closer, muttering that no Navy SEAL would ever drive something like this again. It was outdated, worthless, a museum piece. But Claire kept her silence. She had learned in war that words were wasted on those who refused to listen. The Jeep mattered not because of what it could do, but because of what it represented. The men around her could not see that. They only saw her bent posture, her dirt-streaked face, the grease embedded in her fingernails. They mistook silence for weakness, labor for futility, determination for delusion. And so the tension in the garage thickened, fed by their mockery, her silence, and the echo of her own memories pressing against the walls of her chest. Her hands moved with precision now. She tightened the final bolt, wiped her face with the back of her wrist, and lowered the hood. The Jeep, though scarred and imperfect, stood whole again for the first time in decades. Dust caught the light along its edges. The faded star on its door looked almost proud again. And as she stepped back, the laughter died down. Not because she had spoken, but because something in her silence was louder than their words. Then came the rumble. Boots against concrete, steady and unified, like a heartbeat multiplied by 20. The men at the garage door turned, confused as shadows fell across the threshold. A line of Navy SEAL emerged, their uniforms precise, their posture unbreakable, their faces unreadable. They walked in formation, not toward the men mocking her, but toward the Jeep, toward Claire. The laughter collapsed into silence, so complete it pressed against the skin. The SEAL stopped in front of the vehicle. For a moment, no one moved. Claire stood still, her hands still streaked with grease, her chest rising and falling slowly. The lead SEAL stepped forward, resting a gloved hand on the Jeep's hood. His eyes met hers, not with pity, not with amusement, but with recognition. He gave a single nod. And then, as if on cue, every man in formation straightened, boots clicking into place. The air changed. The men who had mocked her looked small, their shoulders shrinking, their arrogance withering in the shadow of silent respect. Claire said nothing, but the message was undeniable. The Jeep was not just a machine. It was memory restored, a promise fulfilled. Her silence had carried more weight than their words. and now her honor was mirrored in the stillness of those who knew sacrifice. In that moment, one thought lingered above all. Respect is not demanded with noise, it is earned in silence, in resilience, in the quiet restoration of what others consider lost. Claire had not argued with the men who belittled her. She had not defended herself with anger or words. She had chosen the harder path: silence, labor, and unyielding patience. And it was that silence which summoned respect, which brought warriors to her side, which turned mockery into shame. Later, when the jeep rolled into the sunlight, its engine alive again, the soldiers who had once laughed could not meet her eyes. They shifted, shuffled, looked at the ground. Claire's gaze did not linger on them. She looked forward, her face calm, her hands resting on the wheel as if she carried not just a vehicle, but every name, every memory, every sacrifice it represented. And though she spoke no words, the silence itself became a line etched into memory, a truth unshakable. Sometimes the greatest strength is not in the battle fought with weapons or words, but in the battle endured with dignity, patience, and honor. That day, respect stood taller than arrogance. Silence spoke louder than laughter. And one woman's determination restored more than just a jeep. It restored remembrance, honor, and the truth that some sacrifices are never forgotten. Viewers who hear this story are left with the same choice as those men at the garage door: to laugh, to dismiss, to underestimate, or to stand in silence and remember what true strength looks like. The jeep was worth $500 in steel, but what it carried was beyond measure. Now I'll turn to you. Where are you listening from, and what does this story stir in you? If it resonates, share it, let it travel, and let it remind others that silent heroes walk among us every day. Some carry scars, some carry memories, some restore what the world has forgotten, and sometimes all they ask in return is respect.